Welcome to our first 2023 mini mock draft on the channel. And you might be wondering, what exactly is a mini mock draft? I've heard of a variety of different ways of doing a mock draft, but I've never seen anyone do exactly what we're going to do in this video, which is really exciting for me. This is recorded pre-lottery, which is a very important note to include when we're talking about this style video. And today's video is completely focused on the Detroit Pistons. So Pistons fans, make sure you guys smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn that notification bell. All three of those things are going to make it even more likely for you to win the first overall pick in the lottery. Of course, not actually true, but we're going to manifest it nonetheless here. And for a video preview, what is a quote-unquote mini mock? Well, here, a utility sports mini mock looks at one specific team. Today's video is centered on the Detroit Pistons in the NBA draft and what they would take at each draft spot that team could be potentially picking. For example, the Pistons could pick potentially first, second, third, fourth, or fifth overall in this year's draft. So we're going to look at each of those spots and kind of make some assumptions on who would be on the board, who the Pistons would look to target at each spot. And we're starting with the Detroit Pistons in this little mini series of these mini mock drafts because they have the #1 odds in the draft. They have the highest likelihood of not only landing first overall, but they also have the highest floor at fifth overall is the lowest they can pick. So when we look at their draft table, which we will in a second, just a reminder, if you're actually looking for a different kind of mock draft that really goes into the entire first round, I do have one of those posted this past Monday on May 8th. So make sure to go check that out. It completely covers the entire first round. And Pistons fans, I think you'll enjoy that one quite a bit with the lottery simulation. But let's jump into those actual odds now, like we talked about. And in here, you're going to see that the Detroit Pistons have the #1 odds at Victor Wembanyama, a 14% chance to pick first overall, 13.4% chance to pick second overall, a 12.7% chance to pick third, 12% chance to pick fourth, and then almost a 48% chance to select fifth. And it might sound like, oh, well, why do they have such high odds to pick fifth? That's just 100% minus their odds of being in the top four through the lottery. So they have a 52% chance of being a top four pick, basically. So the remaining percentage, 48%, is at number 5 because picks 5 through 30 in the NBA draft are done through standings, through win-loss record. And since the Pistons only won 17 games this year, they have locked up, at worst, the 5th overall pick, but a pretty good likelihood, over 50%, to be picking in the top 4 with, again, that little 14% caveat, to be picking first overall in a really important draft to be picking first because there's a guy named Victor Wembanyama out there. And in case you haven't heard of him, he's the player that every single team would take first overall in this year's draft. There's just no question about it. First overall, the Detroit Pistons would draft Victor Wembanyama. There's not really a lot of rocket science behind this. You don't have to be some mastermind to understand that Wembanyama would be the Pistons' first overall selection. But what I do want to do in this video and in this mini mock series is we're going to talk about Victor Wembanyama's fit pretty quickly on this team and how he would really amplify some of the other players and how he would go along with these cores that he could potentially be joining on May 16th on draft lottery night. And I think, first of all, when we look at Detroit, there's a few different things that really stand out to me. I think, a lot of people are going to look at Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey as the first pairing. I think the really most important one to talk about is Jalen Duren and his role with this team, with Detroit next to Victor Wembanyama. Because you look at kind of what Detroit has right now, they have a lot of project big men. They have, obviously, Marvin Bagley. They acquired James Wiseman. They've also got a few others in there. They have Isaiah Stewart, who's not a project big man, but they like him. He's a quality backup. And then, of course, Jalen Duren, who they took last year in the first round after trading back up to get him. And I think Duren is really one of those build-around pieces for this team. I'm very, very high on Duren's ability to impact the game on both ends of the floor. I think he's going to be highly switchable. I think he's a player you can use in a variety of pick-and-roll coverages. I think you can ask him to do a lot of different things. He can be a corner defender and rotate over as a weak side guy. He can be your main anchor on a defense. I think that he can also defend out on the perimeter fairly well, where it's not a complete mismatch, similar to what we've seen Bam Adebayo do for the Miami Heat in retrospect for garnering, all defensive prowess and just a lot of love across the league Bam Adebayo has received. And I think Jalen Duren's kind of in the same process of getting that kind of love, which is why Victor Wembanyama is such a unique fit here, because you have not one now, but two freakishly skilled defensive bigs who play differently than each other. And I think it's one of the better fits for Victor Wembanyama because of Jalen Duren. I think that front court defensively would become so unique because first of all, Wembanyama has such a big frame and wingspan and length that just you can't simulate in practice. There's not a lot of 7'4" guys who move up and down the court and side to side the way that Wembanyama does. In fact, there's none of them in the league right now. Even Porzingis, who has had some really great defensive metrics around the rim, gets dwarfed by Victor Wembanyama. Chet Holmgren as well, former number 2 overall pick, looks tiny compared to Victor Wembanyama. It's really the difference between, say, Alonzo Ball and kind of like a Darren Williams in terms of the size comparison across those two. Alonzo Ball came into the league with a lot of plus size for his position. It doesn't always mean that the bigger player is better, but a lot of the times there is some really positive impacts, especially defensively, because of that. And I think that Victor Wembanyama is going to be the most severe case of that. That just really helps impact winning and rim deterrence. And you already have another guy there who you can either spell him with Jalen Duren, who they could be on the court at opposite times. They can be on the court together and really wreak some havoc. I think those two are a really dynamic duo that I'm looking forward to watching in the NBA if the Pistons were to get the first overall pick. Plus, then we can mention Ivy and Cade Cunningham, who the Pistons would add not one, but 2 elite offensive players in the same offseason, essentially, since Cunningham missed most of last year, and Victor Wembanyama coming in for his rookie season, I think projects to be someone who's scoring well over 20 points a game his rookie year. The two of them together instantly gives Detroit a massive bump offensively. Bojan Bogdanovic can easily survive as the small forward on this team with how much length would be behind him. To be honest, Detroit's like the really clear, like, hey, Victor fits here and he just plugs in and all of a sudden he's really good right away. And the Pistons are probably a near playoff team, if not a playoff team in year one of Wembanyama's career, because he's going to be that much of a difference maker. But let's say the Pistons select 2nd overall. Who would they take? And there's a lot of discussion about this pick. And, do they take Brandon Miller here? Do they take Amen Thompson on kind of this crazy stretch, or what do they do? For me, it's Scoot Henderson, and it's going to continue to be Scoot Henderson. I know Pistons fans are going to maybe have some questions about this. You won 17 games. I know Cunningham coming back is going to completely change that. Probably would have been closer to a 30-win team, in my opinion. At least like a 27-28-win team, probably. That's how much of an impact I think Cunningham would have had on them winning some of those close games this past year. But I think you throw in Scoot Henderson anyway, and if you're Detroit, you still wouldn't have been good with Cunningham healthy. I think it's all about talent acquisition, especially early on in this kind of, retooling around Cade, who they drafted 1st overall 2 years ago. I know that you took Ivy. Just take another really good player. And I just don't think we should overthink this. I would understand a trade down potentially from this spot as well if you wanted to move back to 3 or 4. Preferably 3 if you knew the team moving up was going to draft Scoot Henderson. That's what I would really consider. But nonetheless, I think Scoot here does make quite a bit of sense still for Detroit because it gives you another downhill creator, someone who I think is significantly better than Killian Hayes. And really, when we've seen some of these really good teams around the NBA, a lot of them have 3 ball handlers, 3 guys that can really handle the rock for you, make good decisions, be semi-league guards at time to time. And some teams, that comes in the variety of wings. You think about Boston with Tatum and Brown, their ability to push the ball in transition, but they also have a variety of guards. Smart and Brogdon, of course, play into that too. You just want to have more guys capable of doing stuff with the basketball in their hands. The more guys that you have that are capable on your team, the better off you're going to be. And in an attempt to compile talent, Scoot Henderson to me still is the number 2 guy on the board, which is why I think, and this is part of why we do these mocks, is because this is a fun thought exercise. Who would the Pistons take here? For me, it's still Scoot Henderson. That's the way I'm leaning as of right now. But I would understand a trade back to 3, and the move back for 3 would end up resulting in obviously a selection of ultimately Brandon Miller here at this spot, a guy that I do like as well. I think he fits very clearly into Detroit's long-term picture because you kind of see Cunningham and Ivy as the backcourt then you slot Brandon Miller in as the 3, and then Jalen Duren's kind of your 5, and then 4, maybe Isaiah Stewart. Maybe you make some other additions. Bojan Bogdanovic, of course, probably is the short-term starter there at least. So for me with Detroit, there's a few things that I do like already about just adding Brandon Miller. You add some really good shooting touch from the outside. Both Bogdanovic and him can stroke that 3-point jump shot consistently. And because of that, it's going to open up the floor for Ivy as a cutter and as a slasher with the ball in his hands. I think Cade Cunningham his overall game, I think Jalen Duren and him are going to find a really good chemistry. Maybe not right away, but over the course of next season, I think the two of them are going to be a really nice and dynamic pick and roll duo. And I think that there's a lot of things that Duren can do that we haven't seen yet from him at the NBA level as a short roll guy. And Cunningham's got the IQ to get the ball out of his hands quickly if he's blitzed or doubled at the level of the screen, which I think is going to open up the floor quite a bit for Duren on the backside when it comes to making decisions. And he's got the ability to kick out to the corner shooter. So if that's Miller and Bogdanovic in both corners, and all of a sudden you have some real threats. Maybe it's Jaden Ivey working out of the corner on a backside cut. We've seen that so many times from the Golden State Warriors, with Draymond Green kind of being that central hub decision maker. And whether it's, Gary Payton II or Andrew Wiggins, in the past it used to be Harrison Barnes, kind of cutting out of the corner there for backside lobs and easy throwdowns. I think that the Pistons are going to have pathways to being able to do a lot of these things and finding a lot of success out of those actions. So now as we transition over to 4th overall, this is one of those that presents a pretty big question for me about who they would select at the spot. I know right now there's kind of a consensus top 4 with Victor, Scoot, Brandon Miller, and then Amen Thompson really garnering a lot of that 4th overall consideration as of right now, and deservedly so. I think as the draft combine comes around here, he's going to garner more and more and more respect, potentially as the number 3 prospect in this class, even with some of his physical traits. But for Detroit, it feels kind of like a messy fit to me. And I know it sounds crazy that I thought Scoot would fit and Amen doesn't quite as much. I think Amen Thompson's a little bit further away from impacting winning in a positive fashion. I think that, with his track record, with where he was playing for Overtime Elite, it's going to be a little bit of a slippier slope for him in terms of impacting winning and really being a good go-to player on a good team early in his career. Now, I'm not saying that 3 years down the road that he might not be an absolutely fantastic player who maybe blossoms into a superstar. His potential is off the chain. He's somebody who could become a very, very good player. But to me, this becomes a trade down spot, which is why you see the background that you do here on the graphic. I think that other teams around the league would have interest in moving up for this pick with Detroit. And here the Pistons, really ideally for them in this spot, what I would like for them to do is to trade out of this pick, try and get pick number 6, 7, or 8, and get a future first with it. If they can do that, they can still get a very, very good player in this draft, albeit maybe not as high of a ceiling, but probably a higher floor. Then that way you can complement that with a future pick from a team that's moving up, and investing in Amen Thompson might be a really smart move for that team long term. But if you can get a pick next year for it, then you're probably getting another really good selection on top of what you already currently have in terms of your own pieces and own young players and prospects that you're looking to develop. You might be able to add more significant young talent while still adding a player in this draft that makes some sense, whether that's a Jarace Walker or a Taylor Hendricks or there's a few other options out there too, but really those are the 2 guys I would like a lot. I mean, even Cam Whitmore would make a lot of sense for Detroit, even, I would argue. So there's players later down the board here after 4th overall that instead of reaching, you can maybe move down a couple spots with a team that would love to add Amen Thompson. Maybe a team that needs a little bit more direction long term, maybe a team that wants to add someone who could blossom into becoming the guy, like maybe a Washington Wizards would be a great example of a team looking to make a big swing on a high potential prospect. And if you can move down with them, it maybe opens up the door to bringing in a high-end player like an Amen Thompson for them, but also you just getting more draft assets, more players that can make sense for you, and actually building along your timeline with players that fit your current core, which is what I really like here for the Detroit Pistons. Then we transition here into 5th overall, and there are some players out here still that I do like at this point. I mentioned some of them with Taylor Hendricks, Jarace Walker, a few others as well, Cam Whitmore, and I struggled really making a strong decision on who I preferred here for Detroit. I ultimately landed on Jarace Walker because I do think he's a pretty clear fit defensively next to Jalen Duren as kind of a 4 who can guard mostly wings and probably can survive out on some guards if they're not the quickest guards in the league. He's got a really good NBA frame to him, 6'8", 240 pounds. And his physicality, I think, is something that would be welcomed by Detroit. They already have some physical presences like an Isaiah Stewart. And I think Walker, the reason why I prefer him over some of the others is I think his shot making is a little bit further along than Cam Whitmore's, and I think a little bit further along than Taylor Hendricks, who is a good perimeter shooter, but not necessarily an off the dribble shot maker yet, which is why Detroit, if you're looking to build offensive talent around Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey. I think one more guy who can put the ball in the deck, create his own shot, and score out of the post too, kind of how PJ Washington does a little bit for Charlotte, but I think to a better extent. I think he's going to be better at it in the NBA than PJ Washington has been. I think Detroit here kind of builds a unique offensive identity while having, kind of a traditional pick and roll game with Duren being your main screen guy there, but you could also have a pick and pop game with Jarace Walker, who could also be a fantastic backside screen setter for players, whether that's on flex screens or Spain action. I think there's a lot of different things you could do with him that really intrigued me for Detroit. And that's the reason I opted for him over the others, although I do think this class is very strong. You guys know, in pretty much every video I've praised this class because I think there's a lot of talent in this draft. But I think Jarace Walker, for me here, for what Detroit is kind of missing, yes, they could use a traditional wing like a Cam Whitmore who has some of that downhill athleticism, especially after they've traded Saddiq Bey this past season. The small forward position's open, but I think you just go with the best talent, the best scoring talent right now, and to me that is Jarace Walker at this spot, which is why Detroit here I think should use the 5th overall pick on him. If, again, worst case scenario, this is where they fall, they're still getting a fantastic player in my eyes. Pistons fans, I hope you did enjoy this video. Again, this has been a utility sports mini mock draft, completely different than what we typically do on the channel, but I think it's a fun little series here to have leading up to the days of the NBA draft lottery. Thanks again so much for watching. Hopefully you did enjoy. If you did, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more, and we'll catch you in the very next utility sports video.